Hey, everybody. Welcome to the I303 podcast, where we share interesting insights and oddball opinions from the perspective of an IO. Here, we try to use science to make the world of work just a little bit better. Imagine if you could work in a place where everyone wanted to go to work instead of having to go to work. So, with that said, I have a guest with me today, Leanne Elliott, and we're going to be talking about generational differences in the workplace. So, with that said, Leanne, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about yourself and tell us about your origin story.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always excited when I hear there's another IO in the world doing this thing and raising awareness. So happy to be here. My origin story, I am from the UK. Your listeners might notice my accent. I was born in the north of England to parents from Liverpool. And when I was day four of being born in the world. I moved to North Wales, which is another part of the UK. So I was never quite English enough for English people because I grew up in North Wales, and I was never Welsh enough for the Welsh people because I was born in England to English parents. So that in itself, I think, from a very early age, taught me how humans see identity and people and how that can impact and influence relationships. That sparked that curiosity, I guess, looking back. And then when I was a teenager, a friend of mine, dear friend of mine, lost her mum very suddenly to meningitis. It was a very traumatic event that our school managed brilliantly and brought in a clinical psychologist to speak to us. And I didn't know much about psychology at that point. I was 15 and I had all these emotions that I didn't know how to deal with. I didn't really know how to show up for my friend. And after an hour and a half sitting with this clinical psychologist, I felt more in control, more able to move forward, and more able to show up for my friend. And at that point, I was like, okay, this stuff is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And that's where my education started to pivot towards psychology.
Yeah, 100%. And that's how most people get started in psychology, whether it's IO, clinical, what have you. It's usually some event that required kind of introspection to say, okay, this is a traumatic event that's happening. What would be the best approach to deal with it? And so, yeah, I went through that. I actually found I was considering clinical first, but a key part of it is having to navigate and manage kind of trauma on a daily basis. And that got heavy. And I recognized, okay, I may not be built for this. So what else can I do in psychology? And that's what brought me over into IO. So essentially how people interact in the workplace.
Very similar experience. They would just say, I volunteered for a suicide prevention charity. And like you say, that vicarious trauma is heavy. I have so
Yeah.
much respect for our psychology colleagues who work in clinical and counseling and trauma. It's heavy.
Yeah, 100%. And so one of the things that sparked my interest in connecting with you and for us to have a conversation is you noted there are pretty significant generational differences when it comes to the workplace. I know we're at a point in time where there is a multi-general generational workplace up to potentially five. So there still are a handful of the great generation kind of before the boomers. Then we have the baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. And pretty soon, we're going to start seeing Gen Alpha start to tiptoe their way into the workplace as well. So, with that said, we have a lot of different perspectives, a lot of potential different approaches when it comes to the workplace. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what do you see as ways Gen Z approaches work just a little bit different?
Do you know what? Before we go down that route, David, I wonder if we could maybe just take a step back and
Sure.
kind of say that generational differences are talked about, and there's a lot of commentary on generational differences. And with that, Gen Z seem to get the tough end of it. I think we connected over an article I was commenting on that was like 6 ways Gen Z are ruining the workplace for everybody. And I find it really interesting as a psychologist to hear these conversations, these narratives happening, and to reflect on what is the science here, what are actually the differences between people. So I wondered if you wanted to play a little game.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So
Yeah.
I've got 6 statements
Okay.
about different generations. Um, and I'm going to read them to you. And I want you to just make a mental note at the end of each one, which generation you think I'm talking about. One generation could appear more than once. So boomers could appear twice. Gen Z could appear 2 or 3 times. But yeah, and I'll go through them. And at the end, we'll see where your thoughts are in terms of how, or media commentary.
Let's
Okay.
do it. Yeah, I'm game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So number one, These young people are dirty, idle, promiscuous, and obsessed with sex and emotions. They question authority, protest wars, reject traditional values, and embrace alternative lifestyles.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay.
Number two, this group is cynical, disengaged, directionless. They avoid hard work. They don't want to get married. They don't want responsibility. They prefer being entertainment. They prefer being entertained, but don't have a long enough attention span.
Hmm. Okay.
Number three, they are entitled, lazy, self-obsessed. They're obsessed with themselves. They're overly reliant on technology. They're disloyal to employees and are constantly job hopping.
Gotcha.
They're immature, rude, rebellious, hypersensitive. They're unable to handle criticism. They're socially awkward and in a hurry to grow up.
Hmm.
Number five, they're a moral threat. They are to blame for the breakdown of traditional values. They shock older generations with their behavior, their fashion, and their independence. And number six, they have intense but unstable emotions. They lose their temper easily, struggle with self control, and act on impulse. They are easily offended.
So my gut is going in two different directions. One
Hmm.
is it all sounds like Gen Z. But for
Hmm.
me, intuitively, I'm like, well, that wouldn't, is that actually happening? So part of me is like, well, obviously it's all of them. But the other part of me is like, well, I don't know. I'm not so sure. So
Uh-huh.
I don't really know how to answer that. But I'm curious to
Okay.
hear how each of those statements, aligns with kind of the different generations.
Yeah. But as you say, it sounds like Gen Z, right? We've heard you
Yeah, yeah.
described by that in that way. Yeah. So description number one, idle, obsessed with sex and emotions. That was media commentary on the baby boomers in the 60s and 70s.
Oh, okay.
Mhm. Description two, labeled cynical, disengaged, directionless. That's our Gen X friends in the 80s.
Okay.
Entitled, lazy, self-obsessed. That's us millennials.
Sounds about
Uh,
right.
yeah. Number four, immature, rude, rebellious, hypersensitive. That was Gen Z.
Okay.
Number five, moral threat. This was actually the Lost Generation. So this was the flappers in the
Mm,
20s.
okay.
And intense but unstable emotions, lose their temper easily, struggle with self control, and act on impulse, easily offended. This was Aristotle describing Greek youth 2,500 years ago.
Okay. So not much has changed, it sounds like.
In more than two millennia, we still have beef with young people and the disruption of youth. And I think this is where I feel for Gen Z and I have so much love for them as a generation who is demanding change, as every youth generation does, because we need it. So, in terms of are there generational differences at work? No,
Yeah,
there aren't really.
yeah.
There are very similar attitudes towards youth at work that has prevailed for millennia. And even just last year, there was a meta-analysis that came out, 143 studies that were looked at, so over almost 160,000 workers, and they looked at generational differences, and they were looking for specific differences around things like meaning at work, fair pay, relationships, balance between work and life. There was no differences at all. And if they did show up, they were tiny to the point that they were not significant and certainly not significant in real working life. The only thing that they did find from 160,000 workers representing these generations is that older workers were slightly less likely to want to quit.
Hmm.
And that is much more explained by point of career in age and context than it is actual generational differences. So, as things stand, we have no scientific evidence that says there are any generational differences at work, but we have 2,500 years that show we all have a bit of a problem with the disruption of youth.
Yeah, yeah, and that seems to make sense. That seems to align. I agree that generational differences may be a misnomer, so not necessarily accurate in terms of identifying differences amongst individuals of different age groups, but it may be, and I've heard to it referred to this way, but I'm neither here nor there. It's the cohort effect. So these groups of individuals experienced different, sometimes major life experiences within the group they particularly grew up with. Millennials, I mean, for us, we went through two huge, potentially, recessions in 2008 and in 2020, kind of the year of, where the whole world went upside down. And so that's unique to us, whereas, boomers, they came about into reality due to the Second Great War. And so they experienced something, their parents experienced something that we have, I think for us millennials, not have experienced that yet. But with everything that's happening on a global scale with, Trump in South America, I don't want to, knock on wood, nothing gets increased beyond that, but we haven't experienced that type of war yet. So with that said, I agree, maybe generational differences is not an accurate representation, but from kind of a popular perspective, it helps frame what we're going to be talking about. So I like the idea that, individuals who are younger or newer into the professional world may approach work a little bit different compared to those who have been incumbents and have been there for a little while. So with that said, have you seen any differences when it comes to any new ideas, new approaches, new ways of work that you see this new group of individuals coming into the workplace?
Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right, is that what we do know is it isn't necessarily generational, but it can come down to context and what we've grown
Yeah,
up with. I'm a millennial and my
yeah,
husband is a Gen, and my siblings are both Gen X. So when I say something like, yeah, but we went through two recessions, I'll go,
yeah,
yeah, well, we went three because we got, the dot
yeah.
bubble
Oh, that's right. I
popping and
forgot
all
about
that.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And then my parents would go, yeah, well, we had like Black Monday in the
yeah,
80s.
yeah,
We went through. So, there's always that kind of
yeah.
compounding effect. But I think what has been particularly disruptive for millennials and Gen Z is that this level of disruption happening at times of their career, and not
That's
really
right.
having a recovery time in terms of the world of work returning to some form of normality in inverted commas because the change is so disruptive. And the key thing of that is that, baby boomers, Gen X had have jobs that are lifetime jobs that they start at
That's
16,
right.
18, that they continue through, they progress, they have a stable pension, they can have cost of living environment where they can afford to buy a house and raise children. And that is not a reality for many millennials and Gen
Yeah,
Z because of the continuous disruption that we've had. So with that comes a very different mindset in terms of, well, if I can't have security and I can't have stability and I can't have the amount of salary that is going to enable me to buy a home and raise a family, then I need to find other ways to gain control. And
yeah,
that control is coming from finding meaning in work, finding purpose in work, finding organizations that align with our values, organizations that want to shape the world that we want to be in, that are taking causes that are close to us seriously, that care about climate, that care about social inequality. And it's those organizations that are attractive to Gen Z especially, and those organizations that really need to work, um, if they can work hard to attract Gen Z, then they're going to win the war for talent. There is an argument, of course, being the psychologist, well, it does depend a little bit.
yeah, yeah.
When you're in your early career, there is an element of being able to take that time to pursue more passion and purpose driven roles because you have the time of your career to recover
Hmm.
and build that financial, hopefully financial independence. If you are of a later stage of age or career, it can be very, very difficult to make those decisions as confidently as much as we might equally want to.
Gotcha. Yeah, and as you were sharing that, that completely resonated with me. I was also thinking, you're right, we did go through a third recession, and that, it does influence how we approach work. And I also agree that the idea of a pension or a solid, consistent work environment is definitely a thing of the past. And so approaches to work that may have worked in the past, stay at an employer, you'll be a veteran there, you'll get, you put in your 40 years and then the organization will pay you for the rest of your life. That was great at the time, but to your point, that no longer exists today. So it kind of makes sense that, millennials and Gen Z, they are apt to potentially see what's on the other side of the fence. Is it greener? Let's go check it out. And to your point, they are younger in their career and they have time to recover if things don't work out the way it should. But at the same time, because they're younger and they have less responsibility, less burden on them, they're able to take those potential risks, which can significantly outweigh the potential cost of staying in one employer. I forget where I read this, but today it may be less, or this may have flipped recently within maybe the last year or so. But there was a point in time where it made more financial sense to job hop because that pay increase was greater than staying within an organization where they promise anywhere between 3, 5, if you're lucky, maybe 10% salary increases. Whereas if a millennial or Gen Z were hopping, they can do that, in one move a year after they've been hired. So it's a 10% raise here, 25% raise here, and before you know it, over the next 3 years, they've nearly doubled their income. Whereas the individual who stayed in an organization only went up 15%. And so it's interesting to see the incentives we put in place to almost encourage individuals to look elsewhere. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that is it was certainly after around the 2021, 22, the Great Resignation, wasn't it? Where
Yeah,
we had massive talent shortages and a booming economy at the
yeah,
time, and people were able to job hop pretty easily for a higher salary. But what's funny to me is, again, the media commentary, which is why I say to any and all generations listening, take it all with a pinch of salt because it's sensationalism and it
yeah,
sells whatever
yeah,
it is. It used to be physical papers, now it's clicks on ads or whatever else. But it's kind of like that. I've been working in employability since 2012, and we were looking at research in 2015 predicting how by 2020 there were going to be massive skill shortages in these white collar knowledge job areas and how organizations had to prepare for them and working with organizations to build that talent. Then the pandemic added a layer of
yeah,
complexity, yes, we
yeah,
did not expect, but those talent shortages still played out. And what
yeah.
happens when you've got more jobs than you have employees is that they can pick and choose a job they want. And of course, you're going to go for a job that will meet your career ambitions and your financial obligations or aspirations. So I think it's all of these things seem to be reported as, oh my gosh, millennials and Gen Z are job hopping and how
Yeah,
dare they? When
yeah.
we've been predicting this for the past decade. It's just easier to blame the young people joining our organization and take accountability for the fact that we haven't done enough to create the jobs and the environment where people actually want to be in. They want to stay.
Yeah, I agree. And so when it comes to creating an environment or creating a context or an approach that would be attractive to individuals who are post-pandemic entering, their working lives, what do you see are some potential approaches employers can use to encourage or entice, hey, we do this a little bit different. Come work with us. Do you see anything that they're doing that is attracting, individuals of that cohort?
Employee experience, I think, is being talked about now more than
Yeah.
ever before, and what that looks like. And it seems to be that Gen Z, our younger millennials, are asking for more around mental health support and services. They're asking for better support around neurodiversity. They're asking for organizations to be aligned with the values that they hold, to invest in climate change and the environment. They're looking for ethical businesses, responsible businesses. So from kind of a company branding play, that's kind of a
Yeah.
really great thing to focus on. You've then got, of course, rewards, recognition, benefits, pay. Gen Z, for as purpose driven as they are, the survey results still show that they rate financial reward as the top
Yeah.
thing they're looking for in a job, as does Gen Alpha. We just had some research come out the back end of last year that said exactly the same thing. Yes, they want purpose in their roles. Yes, they want to be looked after and supported in terms of their mental health. But if the money ain't there, not really interested either. Um, so we need to have great benefits and we need to have great career progression. That's part of recognition as well for an organization. It's how do we create these career pathways for people who then can and want to, they can stay in our organization. The final thing I think, so it's kind of the brand and kind of the reward and recognition. The final thing where I think is a massive opportunity that organizations just haven't got right for decades is how do we create this environment that engages people? And that's across generations, because we're not that different, as we've heard and found out. As humans, we function kind of the same way.
Yeah.
And it's psychosocial risk factors, which have been around for ages and are so unsexy. Nobody wants to talk about psychosocial risk factors. They
Yeah.
want to talk about well-being or employee engagement or employee
Yeah.
experience. And
Yeah.
but what this is decades of research telling us that if we create environments that have great relationships, if we create environments where people have some aspect of control over how change is managed, they have autonomy in their role in terms of how they work. We know all of these things create environments that promote employee engagement, which then promotes job satisfaction, organizational commitment. I'm not going to leave. I'm happy in my job and I find meaning and purpose in it. So I think there's various different ways, but I think there's been so much focus from organizations on one and two, kind of the employer brand and the reward of recognition benefits. Whereas actually, if we can get that third bit right, and we're not, because we're seeing burnout through the roof. We're
Yeah.
seeing, we're seeing job hugging now. The
Yeah.
media is
Yeah.
calling it, where people are
Yeah.
staying. But the minute the economy picks up, the same is going to happen. The Great Resignation 2.0
Yeah.
is coming. If we can figure that out, how to create environments where people can genuinely experience positive relationships, well-being, then that is going to be the thing that actually transforms the work experience for the better for the long term.
Yeah. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I've also seen that there's been a pivot when it comes to organizational branding and getting individuals to be excited to working with a particular organization. That seems to be a newer phenomenon. What I mean by that is, I do also have siblings who are Gen X. My parents are boomers. And the idea of creating a compelling work environment, of creating, an employee engagement experience or an engagement experience from an employee perspective, that wasn't a thing. It's, you just go in there, you grind, you do the work, basically shut up and take it. And then that approach compared to what we're experiencing today is drastically different. So I'm curious if you've come across that. If so, how have you responded? What have your conversations been like for individuals who traditionally have approached work that, we just go in there, we take it, go home, do it again the next day, and then repeat
Yeah.
for 20 years?
Yeah. And how nice was it that you, baby boomer Gen X, could go home and leave
That's a
work at
good
work
point. Yeah,
and
yeah,
it wouldn't come with you?
yeah.
The thing do you know what? And I have clients that I work with who this is a real sticking point for them as well. Like, well, I had to do it and I had to. It's like, yeah, but I'm an older millennial.
Yeah, yeah,
So when I started my career, I would leave work and work would be left there. I didn't have a laptop. I
yeah,
didn't have email on my phone. So I'd finish work at 5:30, as rough and hard as it would be. And I would go and meet friends and I would have a nice time and I would go to bed and I'd wake up and I would have that actual segregation from work. I would have firm boundaries in place. So yeah, I would go back to work next day and get treated like crap from my boss and,
yeah,
do all the grunt work you have to
yeah,
do
yeah,
when you're 21. But the world of work isn't like that anymore. And it's shifted so rapidly. We're talking what, in the last 15 years, we've had that significant shift from
hmm
work stays in work to work is always with me. It doesn't even come home with me. It's following me around everywhere I go. So for organizations and leaders, it's important to know that this ability to disconnect from work is so much harder. It's almost impossible, that we need to be putting in structures and policies in place that allow employees to detach in a meaningful way, whether that be, not having Slack and email on mobile devices. That's not a thing. That you're not able to contact employees after certain periods of time. Like, I think we've seen that in
yeah,
France has recently put that in. Australia has recently put that in as well after 6 p.m. There's so many different things we can do, but the fact is that in 15 years, which isn't that long
yeah,
in
yeah,
terms of organizational life,
yeah.
in 15 years, we've had such a fundamental shift that means that even the experience our 50-year-old siblings had in work is completely different to the one that we have now and Gen Z have now. And this is where, again, organizational well-being is such an important issue. I remember talking to a wonderful well-being psychologist called Dr. Audrey Tang, and she was saying to me how her frustration is the individual focus that still remains on well-being in organizational life. And she likened it to health and safety. She's like, if somebody falls down a hole at work, you're not going to teach them how to climb out of the hole. You're going to fix the hole.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
this is where we've got to with with well-being, with burnout, because of this always on mentality that we've got ourselves into in organizations, that we're teaching people to climb out the hole by giving them resilience training, when we should be actually thinking, how do we create an environment that isn't toxic, that isn't problematic to the human experience? Because it's just not sustainable. And that is why we're seeing through the roof rates of burnout and mental health challenges.
And so with that, I'm seeing we're kind of at a transition period. So I'm gonna tie this together with what we've been talking about. So boomers, Gen X, they've been comfortable with kind of, just grinding away, regardless of the work environment. I'm gonna go in, put in my hours, go home. I like your point where we're able to split that, where work is work, home life is home life. Millennials, Gen Z, we're at a point where work is always on. And so organizations compete to attract workers by creating a really compelling workplace, work environment, work-life balance. From a business or organizational perspective, they're at a point in time now, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, where they can invest all kinds of money to try to create a compelling environment, or rather than hire someone who's carbon-based, a person, they may transition to, well, why would I hire a carbon-based employee when I can create a silicon-based employee who will not need a perfect environment, who will work 24 hours a day, never call out sick, never, be late, will always listen. So from an employer perspective and then from an employee perspective, we're at this crossroads where we want to have an exciting environment, a compelling environment to come into work. But from the employer perspective, they may be asking the question, why? I can just hire this other, silicon-based employee who will be perfectly fine in whatever environment I put them in and work nonstop. So what are your thoughts on
Yeah, AI is going to disrupt
that?
knowledge workers
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah,
But I think that's going to happen regardless of our kind of desire to create these great workplaces. Because let's be
yeah,
honest, it's business, it's commerce. People want more profit and more
yeah,
revenue. If that
yeah,
means having AI, they're going to do it. I was reading about, because I think what's really interesting about the AI discussions, and it is scary. It is a
yeah,
bit frightening, isn't it? When you hear all these statistics. I read one the other day, it's like 30% of current skills knowledge workers have will be obsolete in 5 years' time or be replaced by AI.
yeah,
Um, and in terms of the disruption of it is frightening. We're going to see loads of jobs disappear, just as in throughout history with every technology revolution. We've seen a similar thing, and eventually, if we look back, through the kind of the technology transformation of the internet, if we go back to the industrial revolution, eventually the number of jobs created by this technology innovation does exceed the number of jobs that it's replaced.
yeah,
But that's in a longer term scenario. So this is the awkward bit where we're in that
yeah.
transition, in that change. One thing that brings me reassurance is that I also saw some research that looked at the human skills that are going to become even more important as AI starts to infiltrate our work environment. And these were things that are very much what you and I probably harp on about all the time in terms of leadership skills that have been
Yeah,
overlooked for far too long. And it's things like emotional intelligence, it's things like empathy, it's things like having difficult conversations,
yeah,
self-awareness, and it's all these human factors that are going to mean so much more in an environment that does have to combine human and artificial intelligence. Because we're never going to have, unlikely we're going to have many workplaces that will be 100% AI. There's
yeah,
going to be some proportion of human element there. So with that, it almost gives us permission to be more human, because those skills that have been overlooked or undervalued are suddenly much more important, because they're the skills that the organization is going to need to manage that balance, or that humans will respond to. There's also some research recently that was looking at how, because I'm sure you've heard of frightening statistics around how lots of people are now using ChatGPT for therapy.
yeah.
And it's
Uh-huh.
frightening. It's frightening because ChatGPT, there's also research that shows, has huge correlations with the dark triad personality traits, so narcissistic, pathological,
Yeah,
Machiavellian. So that's concerning in itself. Um, but there's this other research that has looked at how humans rate outputs of AI. So if they're looking at art, and if you go, which one do you prefer? And they go, that one. I definitely prefer this beautiful picture here. And it's go, okay, well, that was created by AI. Oh, actually, do you know what? I prefer the other one. There's still
Yeah,
this bias and
yeah,
snobbery that we have in terms of human creation. The effort that that takes is given so much more respect than something that can do it very quickly, and that is maintained over time. We've had what, 100 years of having technology replace things potentially in terms of creativity. So I think there will always be an element of humans needing to be in an environment and being preferred to be in an environment. And very briefly, because I know I'm going on,
yeah,
what you were saying before in terms of employee experience being a thing and employer brand being something that's talked about, I can see we are human first being a big aspect of employer branding that will differentiate them from competitors and will attract talent and attract consumers in a way that will provide a competitive edge. I think it'll almost go full circle
yeah,
in a way.
yeah. Yeah. So similar to you, I agree. There are certain skills that I think we're going to come back to. So what I mean by that is there was kind of the rational revolution, if that I'm unofficially going to call it that, the rational revolution, where it was kind of the great Greek, Roman philosophers who really spent a lot of their time trying to, figure out what's the purpose of life? Why are we here? Really, for lack of a better term, philosophizing on existence. Then we kind of entered the scientific revolution phase, kind of the Enlightenment, where a lot of it was really focused in on how do we gain the most knowledge in really narrow and really specific areas. So I think humans compared to AI, so I'm going to compare and contrast these humans versus AI. So humans, we went from rational to the scientific, really getting granular in terms of what we're trying to research and the answers we're trying to gain. I think AI is going to be better at that than humans. They're going to be able to access the entire internet, virtually any piece of knowledge that have ever existed, whether text, video, audio, you name it, they can analyze it at a grander scale and at a grander speed than potentially all of human existence combined. So I think specific science potentially, and feel free to jump in, whenever you disagree or have a thought. So I think AI is going to be better at that compared to humans. But I think where AI may struggle a little bit is going back to the rational or the more philosophical approach to life. So I think fundamentally we're going to transition from can we do this as a human species to should we do this as a human species? And I think those foundational, justice, fairness, morality, ethics, I think those are going to make a huge comeback. One, because AI is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to the granularity of, information. And two, I think those skills are transferable, where it can work theoretically across all domains, across all professions. You want someone who's ethical, you want someone who demonstrates justice, you want someone, moral, empathetic, that can transfer to theoretically every position across any organization, theoretically across the world. So I'll pause there to see, what your thoughts are on what you see as kind of the grander scale in terms of where we're going moving towards the future.
I agree. I
Okay.
agree. I think there's absolutely gonna be this swing back to these aspects that are so distinctly human.
Yeah.
That, as you said, whether it's not that AI can't do it, it's whether they should do it.
Yeah.
And already we're seeing conversations around that,
Yeah.
aren't we, in terms
Yeah.
of ethics. I think what's also interesting about, if we talk about kind of creativity within that, is we're already seeing a surge in what we traditionally call blue collar workers, which I think is a problematic term at this
Yeah.
point, isn't it? Trade workers,
Yeah.
creative
Yeah.
workers. So people, yeah, like stonemasons, like plumbers, like joiners. We're already seeing a massive increase in demand for those roles, shortage in those roles. And I think that again is something that isn't can't really be replaced by AI as such. And I was looking at it was actually in the Financial Times. It was saying that over the next 5 years, there's going to be 200 data centers built around the world to cope with the AI capability that will be demanded by 2030. That's going to employ 450,000 technicians and engineers just to build the data centers.
Yeah.
Then you're going to have the people that need to maintain it, the people that need to troubleshoot it, that which is what I said earlier in terms of, eventually more jobs will be created. But I think you're right. I don't think there'll be the knowledge-based jobs. I don't
Yeah.
think there'll be the statistical analysis-based
Yeah.
jobs. They're going to be the creative trade-based jobs, or as you say, the much more philosophical, ethical type roles, thinking roles in terms of what does humanity need on a wider basis. Yeah, and it's quite exciting from that perspective. I think it's almost that, because I don't know about you as a psychologist, I quite like statistics.
Yeah.
I quite like seeing the numbers pop out and I'm like, oh, that's cool. But I much prefer my time spent interpreting it and thinking, what does that mean, and how can we then change something that will influence this in an organization and do something really cool for the people in it? I don't get my kicks out of looking at SPSS in a spreadsheet, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
Sure, there are lots of people out there that do,
Yeah.
no disrespect, but I don't. So for me to be told that AI could do that part of my job and I get to do the stuff that I experience as higher value tasks and more purpose led tasks and tasks that give me more meaning, then that's going to be great for my work, my experience of the
Yeah.
workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's kind of point one. I'm glad we see it in similar fashions and we kind of align on where we see the future of work going. Part two, and I'm really curious to get your thoughts because I've seen a couple of individuals on a couple of different podcasts that are saying, yes, new jobs have been formed whenever new technology has come about. But what makes the AI revolution a little bit different is it's not just task specific, but it potentially can be any task. So where I'm going with that is AI does not do, Excel better. It can even take a broader perspective and do data analysis regardless of platform. And if we keep expanding out, that's one of the things that makes AI different than, a hammer or AI different than a saw is those were created for a very specific purpose or have a specific function. What makes AI different is it can be applied in multiple domains. And so it's almost to the point where it can do data analysis better than a person. It can theoretically, to your point, create better works of art than a person. And so not only does it take specific roles, but it can learn and then theoretically take all roles. So I've heard, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, that this is what makes AI different, that it can theoretically do anything a person can do, but do it better. What are your thoughts there?
Theoretically, I'm sure it
Yeah,
can. I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
doubt these clever people who know much more about AI than I do. I think, as you said, it comes down to whether it should and also whether
That's right.
economically that's the smart
That's right. Yeah,
decision. Because if we're getting rid of so many jobs that nobody's employed and nobody's got any money and we're all claiming social, or I
yeah,
did hear it's going to be this kind of universal, kind of almost like communism type affair where everyone will get a set amount,
yeah,
which it goes against how Western society has been living for
yeah,
a long time now. So I think there will be legislation and politicians that will be much more concerned about the economic impact of this rather than the human impact of this. But you know what? If that starts the
yeah,
changes and policy changes that need to be done to protect the human experience, I'm okay with that. And again, it comes down to, I think, particularly with art and I think creative, there's an absolute beauty in imperfection. And we look at all the greats across, centuries. It's not about having the most perfect painting or the most perfectly figured out way of doing something. It's about having something that is beautifully imperfect. And in a similar way, the innovation of humans when it comes to thinking about content creation the
yeah,
last 5 years. Look how YouTube has now replaced TV for a lot of people.
yeah,
We look at podcasts, we look at TikTok. I think there's always going to be ways that people want to create uniquely. And as humans, there's always going to be content we want to consume because it's unique and because it's fresh and because it's interesting. That's what holds our attention and gets us excited. So I think the technology may move at a rapid point where we can all be replaced tomorrow. But a risk of being that cliche psychologist, like, oh, evolutionary speaking, we don't change that fast.
yeah,
We don't. So we're
yeah,
still going to want to experience humanity in the way that we're used to, and that means connection. That means relationships, human to human connection, and relationships, which we also know are the biggest predictor of everything in our life. Relationships are the biggest predictor of how long we live. of how much we earn, of our quality of life, our health, our career prospects. So if we know and consider that that is always the most important thing, relationships, AI can take everything, but we just can't allow them to take that. And that's why it scares me when I hear about AI, you know, therapy and all that type of thing. But yeah, I think it comes down to what you said before. There's things that it could do and things that it should do. And I think ultimately greed is very hard baked into our Western capitalist societies. And that will always depend, I think, on having people spending money,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So I like that you brought up the idea of an economic perspective. That's starting to come up a lot more with, me and my cohort, me and friends that I speak to. Not only do we talk about, the benefits of creating a compelling work environment, getting individuals motivated, engaged, giving them a great work experience, but I think so tying back into the philosophical approach, I think if we extrapolate and keep recognizing that things are with AI are going to keep changing faster and faster as we move closer and closer to the future, it eventually will come down to economics. So from an economic perspective, beyond the psychological, beyond the, sociological, it really comes down to economics. And I like how you noted that in the West, traditionally, we've approached the world from a capitalistic perspective, where, there are individuals who earn a wage to be able to purchase something provided by someone that wants to satisfy that need. What happens when that starts to break down? I don't know the answer to that. But I see us, if we're on this track, we're on this trajectory where that seems to be the inevitable conclusion, that AI just keeps taking more and more roles. From a business perspective, it makes the most sense. They can pay a machine or an AI to do the work of an employee at a fraction of the cost. Why wouldn't they do it? So less and less individuals start having roles, less and less individuals start being able to make an income. Do we transition to that universal basic income? Is that still a capitalistic environment? At what point, do we make that transition to capitalism versus something else, which one's contrary to, the way we've lived in Western society for almost all of Western society? And so I don't know what to do with that. But I feel, well, long story short, me and my friends have been talking about this pretty profusely, quite a bit. What is the world going to look like when we reach that precipice and we're on the verge of tipping over from, capitalist society, earning an income to we don't have a job, universal basic income? What is that going to look like? What are your thoughts there?
I read some really
Yeah.
interesting research from Hogan, who's a
Okay.
personality assessors. And I was talking to on our podcast Dr. Ryan Sherman, who's one of the head scientists at Hogan, that was looking at the personality traits of entrepreneurs. So our people who drive capitalism and create change and opportunity, and they are typically quite narcissistic and very grandiose and low
Yeah.
on conscientiousness and like to bend rules. So he's done this whole study around entrepreneurs and how unique their personalities are. He also did a separate piece of work looking at the personality traits of criminals, of hardcore
Yeah.
career criminals, organized crime. And he found no difference
I
between
had
these
a feeling you were going
personality
to say that.
profiles.
Yeah, I had a
Mhm.
feeling you were going to say that.
The only difference was context.
Yeah.
So if our context changes to where AI rules everything and we are now obsolete and redundant, we will find ways to be creative. We will find ways to meet demand and make money. We will find ways to fulfill the ultimate need that we need to. Because it comes down again to the which is where psychology and philosophy were
Yeah.
born at the same time, really, weren't they? It's that what is the purpose of working? Or what's the purpose of work or what's the purpose of working?
Yeah.
So working provides us with so much in terms of social identity, in terms of status, in terms of sense of worth. That's not going to go away just because AI has taken all the jobs. So we will find ways to fulfill that for our survival. And what we know as humans is we're pretty good when it comes to survival. We adapt, and it's come back to that kind of Charles Darwin aspect, isn't it? Survival of the most adaptable.
Yeah.
Anarchy, in short, I think is what will happen.
Yeah. Yeah. At least for the short period of time. And I think at least in the States, I don't hear enough people talking about this, where, it's almost AI is happening over there. It's happening out there. It's, it's not happening to me. It's not impacting me directly. So I don't, and maybe this is me making a mountain out of a molehill, but as I try to peek towards the future and around the corner, I see this almost as an inevitability that we will get there, but nobody's talking about it. And so I don't know what to do with that. That am I the only person seeing this? Am I the only person reacting this way? Am I overreacting? I don't know. Am I, for lack of a better term, am I being a doomer? And so it's like, man, I don't know. So what are your thoughts? Am I exaggerating? Am I thinking too much into this? Am I, being a worrywart for the lack of a better term?
No, I don't
Okay.
think you are. I don't think you are. I think if we learned anything over the past 10 years is that humanity has the potential to be really dark and really, self-centered and not we're not here for each other, in a lot of probably like no other species is really. We are so destructive to ourselves and everything around us. So I don't think you're overreacting. Um, you know what? I wonder whether there's the cultural difference here. And I don't know, like
Tell me more. Yeah.
because in Europe, I have read many things, usually from like the Wall Street Journal or something, that will talk about how productivity is so much lower in Europe because of the lifestyle that we have, where, I mean, the UK, not so much, but I live in continental Europe. So yeah, we have pausa that'll happen between like somewhere between 12:30 and maybe 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
Can never
Yeah.
really be sure how long it lasts.
Yeah.
August, everyone basically takes the entire month off. So it's either a thought of will that be the salvation in that the human way of life will somehow break through to, I don't know, to slow down the pace of AI?
Yeah.
Or are we all absolutely screwed because while we're drinking coffee in the square, AI has already kind of started invading
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
lives. So I don't know whether there'll be some cultural differences in terms of America, Europe, China, Russia that are gonna play out. Um, I don't know. In terms of if I'm gonna be a doomer, my
Yeah.
doom anxiety
Yeah.
doesn't come from AI. My doomer anxiety comes from humans. Humans will always be more scary for
Yeah.
me than any technology can be.
So that, man, I don't want to go down like a philosophical route, but that does lead me to the thought that popped into my head is, would humans be better if they, what's the word that I'm looking for here? If they subordinated themselves to the power of the algorithm. Here's what I mean by that. And so I've taken really deep dives when it comes into AI and its potential benefit. So, couple of tangents here. I know I'm all over the place, but go with me.
I'm with you.
When it comes to cultural differences, I think there's a pretty big divide when it comes to how the West is viewing AI and technological innovation versus the East. Here's what I mean by that. The West typically sees it dystopian, where technology, machines, they're coming in to ruin our lives. Whereas Eastern philosophy, I know at least in Korea, in Japan, they see AI innovation, technology innovation as more utopian, where it's going to allow individuals to connect better, to be able to pursue their passions. So that's almost a contrast between individualistic versus collectivistic perspectives when it comes to the use of technology. So we have cultural differences, the West versus the East, dystopian versus utopian. And so when it comes to humans leaning into or subordinating themselves into the AI, I've seen a couple of researchers, particularly a couple who used to former Google executives who were heavy into the AI field, where they feel individuals who, this is going to be controversial, but I'm curious to get your thoughts. Individuals who subordinate themselves to the AI algorithm, where it's been watching everything you do, it knows your personality profile in terms of the big five, it knows what your interests are, what your strengths and opportunities for development are, and it's been tracking you since the moment of birth. So this is the utopian view of AI. Humans who subordinate themselves, I don't want to say to the whim, but to the recommendations of the AI, will outperform those who try to fight against it. And I'm curious to get your thoughts. Do you see that as true? And in this case, it's almost an East versus West perspective, where it's the dystopian view versus the utopian view. completely follow AI. It has my best, or ideally, it's been designed to have my best interest at its heart, if it has one. But it's been following everything I do. It knows everything about me, all my theoretically, my genetic traits, my personality traits, everything I want. It knows that, and it can recommend steps for me to get there. Do you think that's realistic? Do you think that's something we should be afraid of, or something we potentially can lean into? And I know I
Oh,
threw a lot at you.
yeah. This is the first time I'm ever thinking about this,
Yeah,
and I'm
yeah,
quite introverted, so I'm going to try and think out
yeah, yeah,
loud.
yeah.
Um,
Uh,
do you know what pops into my mind when you're saying
Sure,
that is
talk
I
to me.
don't know.
Yeah,
As do I don't particularly like the thought of AI telling me what I should be doing, but then equally, there are plenty of days I have decision fatigue, and actually, if someone going, do you know what, this is the best thing you could do right now, and I know that scientifically, mathematically, that's
yeah,
correct. As a scientist, I'd probably lean into that and go, okay, you know better than I do. Let's go for it. I wonder whether it is about whether it's as simple as that, because I think it's context. And as we were talking about generations, we
hmm
can't forget about context. And in terms of this more East world perspective, and it's the first time I've heard this
yeah,
actually, but I'm thinking about Eastern cultures and what they do so differently is this idea of community in terms of collective
correct. Yeah, yep,
responsibility for society that isn't the individualism that
that's exactly right.
can be quite
Yeah,
problematic at times. So my thought is their context is much more equipped to handle this level of technological innovation because the human elements they've got working better.
yeah. Part of me is leaning into that. That, yeah, I think so too. That collectivistic approach really puts them almost at an advantage because they still have that sense of purpose, that sense of meaning, that sense of fulfillment outside of the work.
Spirituality is
Yeah,
a massive part as well. And yeah.
yeah. So I agree. So going back to your thoughts on pushing for or pushing against AI recommendations. So I'm going to complicate the situation a little bit more. So imagine your personal AI, Leanne's specific AI, was composed of a council of experts where you had the best, therapist, you had the best mental coach, the best physical fitness coach, the best career coach, all at your beck and call, all watching you, all providing recommendations. Does that change your willingness to be able to take their recommendations and move forward with them? Curious to get your thoughts on that.
In that, if I had these experts around me at my beck and call, would I be more likely to lean on their expertise?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I probably not.
Okay.
Because I think again, I mean, yes, because in it makes
It's
logical
tricky.
sense,
Yeah.
right? It makes logical sense that we lean into that. But again, I think we're applying this kind of level of AI technology thinking to the human experience, which isn't that tidy.
Yeah.
I've locus of control, and if I don't feel in control, I don't like it. And part of that feeling out of control is somebody telling me what to do.
Yeah.
And we know as well that individuals who experience a continued low locus of control have lower life satisfaction and can experience poorer mental health and poorer relationships. So it's kind of that almost that kind of ebb and flow. If I give you ultimate control, that loss of control is going to be detrimental to my experience as a human.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an
Yeah.
interesting
It's
thing.
tricky.
And
Yeah.
then also, we're not also thinking about people who are neurodiverse, who the thought of being told what to do would be completely, it would completely repel them in that way. So people with autism or ADHD, this world just wouldn't be conducive to them. There'll be an alternative use of AI and technology that will be, um, which I think comes down to then we're talking about individualization, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
One.
is which is where maybe where the power of it is and the harmony of it is
Yeah.
perhaps.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely align with your perspective, your approach. And for me, it's setting up, to your point, the context where we're not saying someone must obey this, council or this panel of experts, but it's creating the context and the environment where we enable or empower individuals to choose if they want to they can listen to them, recognizing that this council has my best interest at heart, your best interest at heart, and theoretically individualize that to everybody across the globe. And so, yeah, for me, it's I think we're going to get there sooner rather than later, where I have, any expert I want to speak to in my pocket, and it'll be up to me to decide, do I listen to what they're recommending or not?
Mm.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing the research on that type of scenario
Yeah.
as to whether if you had two cohorts and you had experts that
Yeah.
were AI and experts that were human, how many people actually listen more to which or actually change behaviors? Because we know behavior change is really hard anyway. If you're working with human experts, I'd be really interested to see the research behind that. And my feel is, I don't know. My feel is we're flawed as humans. I'm not sure we'd listen to them as much as we know we should.
Yeah. I agree. And to your point, that internal versus external locus of control, that can definitely influence the extent to which someone may or may not listen. So for me, that's where I try to pull in insights from other disciplines, if you will. And I've come across behavioral economics where it's kind of a blend between economic theory and psychological theory, where they really come together. And one of the things that have really stood out to me is the idea of both nudge theory and choice architecture, where we can't, in a world where we can't force individuals to make a decision, even if it's in their best interest, what we can do is create the context that'll increase the probability that individuals will make a decision in their best interest. And so for me, that may be the logical conclusion or the logical next step when it comes to implementing AI, using AI to nudge or encourage individuals to use it, but not mandate that they do.
I agree. Rory Sutherland talks about behavioral
I
economics a
love
lot as
him.
well.
I love
He's
him.
brilliant,
Yeah.
isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
He
brilliant. And I think as well, and his big thing is context. That's the big
100%.
thing.
Yeah.
So he was talking about Airbnb. He was like, it's a fundamental idea. Airbnb is brilliant. If you're a farmer in rural Scotland who has some old farm buildings that are just sat there and you can renovate them and you'd never rent them to someone local because it's too remote, but you'd get some, people there for a weekend to have a wonderful break in the Scottish Highlands and have a fabulous time, and that generates more income for the farmer. Everyone's happy. In Barcelona, where you've got Airbnbs that are just taking homes away from local people, and Barcelona doesn't even feel Spanish or Catalan
Yeah.
anymore because there's no local people left.
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
Yeah.
So it comes down to context, and we can have this great idea, but if we don't apply it in the right way, or we apply it in a way that is counterproductive to the local human experience, then it causes problems, doesn't it? And that's why we see protests and we have seen violence against tourists in Barcelona. So yeah,
When it comes to Rory Sutherland, so real quick, I really like his take on electric vehicles. So right now, there's still, at least in the States, a reluctance or resistance to lean into electric vehicles. And he shared the idea of what if the evolution of automobiles were in reverse, meaning electric vehicles, they have less moving parts, they're less complicated, they're easier to manage and maintain from a consumer perspective. Imagine trying to introduce the idea of a loud, obnoxious, many moving parts, always breaking down form of automotive travel. So imagine that world where we're trying to transition EV into combustion engine. That doesn't make any sense. So it doesn't make sense why there's all this resistance to moving from a combustion engine that has many moving parts, continually breaks down, harms the environment, to something that does the exact opposite. Like it doesn't make sense that there's this struggle or this resistance against it. So I find his thought process really interesting when it comes to, how he views the world.
yeah, and it is, and it's so smart,
It kind of is.
and
Yeah.
it's so smart,
Yeah.
and it's based in all this amazing Ogilvy. The stuff he did
Yeah.
there is
Yeah.
continues to be phenomenal, um, but also in terms of the very basic psychology that sits behind that. We hate change.
Yeah.
We really hate change.
Yeah.
Change is hard. Change is an emotional, physical, psychological toll on us. We go into that threat state that everyone talks about. We withdraw from people around us. We get cynical. It's basic psychology. We're not very good at change.
Yeah.
So it is, and that's what, behavioral scientists are gonna find their rightful place in this new world, because it's all well and good, as you say, having the technology, but if people won't adopt it, then What's the
It's all
point?
for naught. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a great conversation today. I think it was a great back and forth. I like the idea of remembering it's not generational differences, it's potentially cohort differences. That if we look at the long bend of history, we're not that different than we were, 2000 plus years ago. So with that said, is there anything else you wanted to chat about before we call it a day?
I would like to think that anybody listening to this conversation, which has been wonderful, by the way, thank you
Yeah,
so much,
I agree.
is just knowing that if the one takeaway is just knowing that we have so much more in common than we have not in common as different ages, as different generations, as different nationalities, people across the world. We all want the same things. We all worry about the same things. We all care for the same things. We are quite simple people when it comes down to it. We want good relationships. We want meaning in our lives and our work. And we want to have conversations that yeah, spark curiosity and new ways of thinking and push our boundaries. So yeah, I think we're all much more have much more in common than we are different. But yeah, that would be my final thing would be if you are Gen Z and you're reading these things in the newspapers about how you're entitled and how you're woke and how you shouldn't be demanding more mental health support and you're entitled for wanting more meaning in your work, keep going. This is a disruption of youth and this is what drives change. That's why the baby boomers started the Peace Corps. This is why we saw so much innovation and it's just what happens. Youth brings disruption, youth brings innovation, and youth ultimately brings changes that we will all benefit from. We will all benefit from having better mental health support services in organizations. We will all benefit from having more meaningful work, from a better work life integration, segregation, whatever you want to call it these days. We will all benefit. So stay entitled, stay woke, keep going because we will all benefit from it.
I love it. So, Leanne, if people wanted to connect with you, where would you recommend they go?
You can listen to my podcast that I have with my husband and co-host Al Elliott called Truth, Lies, and Work, or part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find me on LinkedIn. I've been Leanne Elliott. You'll see me. Always send me an email. I'm always happy to receive emails. Hello@truthliesandwork.com.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you all in the next one.